Hi there, I'm Joey from EDH Rec, and listen, I know that Magic Foundations is the talk of the town right now, but dang it, I just built a new deck and I've gotta talk about it. Marina Vendrell is the first 5-color deck I'm adding to my permanent roster. That Magali art drew me in like a magnet, and the Rooms of Duskmourn are a mechanic I've absolutely loved exploring. All your spells are 2 spells, one of which you get to cast later, and she can unlock them for free, or relock them to trigger it multiple times again later. I just love this thing, and I went on a really weird journey with her. So weird that I actually wound up going in a very different direction with this very narrow commander than I first expected I would. And I also wound up with a whole pile of very good cards for her that it turns out I'm not actually going to end up using in this deck. So please join me for the journey of how I immediately built and then rebuilt my newest commander. I'm gonna jump right into it. This here is approximately what my first version of the deck looked like, and it is spicy. Tons of rooms to unlock, classic enchantresses, of course, and some especially fun synergies that I simply could not wait to pull off in a game. Since Marina's Enter the Battlefield effect lets you keep all the enchantments you find off your top 7 cards, I obviously made sure to bend my ramp and removal to enchantmenty things as well, so that she could keep more cards and of course keep up my enchantment count for enchantresses and various win cons or pillow fort effects that care about that number. I was genuinely so excited to deploy some of these, freed from the Reel and Pemin's Aura to repeatedly untap Marina so she could lock and relock and lock a room over and over and over again to get tons of benefits, such as making extra tokens or removing more creatures. Doomwake Giant, classic of the genre, picking off enemy creatures. Zur is nutty in this deck, turning the rooms into creatures, permanently, by the way, that effect doesn't fade at the end of turn, and giving them protection and lifelink, and they get even beefier when those rooms are fully unlocked. I love the idea of cards like Protection Racket in this deck too, because all the rooms have such high mana values when you flip them off the top. Like, hey, you want to let me have this or take 11? Cool, thanks. All right, next, do you want to let me have this or take 8? Rad, and so on every turn. It's just awesome. But once I assembled this version of the deck, I playtested it a few times here on Architect, and something wasn't right. In a word, the deck was too good. So many of the cards that I put into this deck, they were brilliant. Their synergies are off the charts. But the more I played this room deck, the less and less the deck seemed to actually care about the rooms. So how did things end up that way? Well, first, let's talk about Marina's ability. Wizards, why? Why does she let you keep all the enchantments from your top 7? That ability is bonkers powerful. I understand the game design instinct that makes one worry about whether her only finding rooms off the top of the deck would be too restrictive, too niche, but I am not kidding when I say that Marina regularly draws like 5 cards upon entering the battlefield. That effect is so powerful, and it's so powerful that you begin to not even care about the rooms at all. Flicker her with a teleportation circle, draw even more ramp and removal things, more Eidolons of Blossoms, more Sanctum Weavers, more Jukai Naturalists. She can grab it all. And with all the other accoutrements that come with that type of strategy, the room enchantments kind of stopped mattering. You don't even need to lock and unlock them. Most of them just ended up feeling like pretty fancy versions of removal spells. And at a certain point, the actual effects of the rooms barely even seemed to matter either. The real important thing was just that they trigger enchantress effects, or that Marina could get you more cards. Now, this is fine. There are tons of players who love this kind of thing, who love to abuse a commander's abilities to really just push things as far as possible. Marina's got over 3,700 decks to her name right now, and she's the second most popular commander from the main Duskmourn set. There are clearly a lot of people for whom this playstyle is exactly what they wanted. 5-color enchantress, meet your new mother. And I think it's also important to point out that we've seen this level of archetype abstraction before. That's what I'm calling it, at least. Perhaps we could also call it the EDH equivalent of semantic satiation. You know when you say or read a word over and over and over and over and over again to the point that it starts to feel meaningless, like you don't even recognize that word anymore? There are certain things commander decks can do, especially when they involve a lot of repetition, that can kind of cause that to happen in EDH too. Take, for instance, Hellar. Hellar ostensibly cares about kicker, but players who've got a lot of experience with that deck know that the really important thing is to get a lot of counters onto them. So then when you cast any kicker spell, you'll deal a ton of damage. The actual kicker spell itself doesn't really matter. It could literally do anything and you'd be happy. The cheaper it is, the better, in fact, because it's just a means to ignite the damage trigger. Compare this to commanders like Verizal, whose relationship to kicker is very different. Verizal cares a lot about what spells you're kicking, and it wants those effects to feel worth doubling up. Edgar Markov is another famous example. His ability is so powerful and so fast that over time, Edgar Markov players run fewer and fewer high mana creatures and just try to play a whole bunch of low to the ground vampires. No matter what creature you're playing, you get twice the bodies either way, and those bodies all pump up the exact same with your game winner spells, so why pay 6 mana when you could just pay 1 or 2? As players get more experience with that deck and as they upgrade it, the actual abilities of the vampires grow less important than the result of just being able to swarm up the board. So personally, I was very pleased to see that when Wizards made another vampire precon years later, the Strafon commander took vampires in a different direction, one that cares about the high-cost vampires that weren't really able to receive love from the most popular vampire manders play patterns. Like with Halar or Edgar, that's kind of how I started to feel about the rooms in my version of a tuned-up Marina Vendrell list. Tapping Marina felt completely secondary to just trying to get as many cards as possible off of her Enters the Battlefield effect. Unlocking the rooms barely seemed to matter. If anything, they almost felt like a waste of time, because what really had an impact was just getting an Enchantress trigger, or a Haunting trigger for more tokens, getting another number up for All That Glitters. All cards that are powerful, all plenty exciting in their own right, but dang it, I wanted to unlock those stupid rooms. That's what I was after when I built this deck. And yet the commander's hyper-powerful Enter the Battlefield ability, and frankly the sheer power of the Enchantress archetype in general, made unlocking rooms a total afterthought. So what I did with the deck instead was this. Welcome to Marina's Haunted House. You may notice a few renovations. Not upgrades, no, far from it. As the lead architect, I've decided to scale things way back. Those other folks like Sithis wanted this to be nothing more than a snazzy space for new condos, efficient, sleek, but suspiciously similar to that other set of condos that just went up across the street. What I wanted was to put the Baroque back into Baroque Commander. I wanted pointed arches and flying buttresses. I want it gaudy. I don't need it to be Frank Lloyd right. I'm fine with it being Frank Lloyd wrong. As hard as I can, I've themed the whole deck to feel like you're in Marina's horrible mansion. Even my lands are rooms, thank you to the clue set. Slowing up the mana base does considerable damage to the deck's tempo, but if it means that I'm taking this deck that was popping off on turn 6 and moving that back a skosh, I think that's more than okay. My ramp isn't the usual enchantments, but instead things like a fireplace, the TV screen, some decanters of wine and drink, or the seal that was probably left somewhere in the study. There are many classic enchantment removal cards out there, but I instead stuck with the creepy house ones, like the doll on the shelf that's unable to scream, or being sheltered by ghosts, or trapping Yugi's grandpa in the TV. Every good house needs the classic features too. Watch out for that false floor, and any troublemakers may end up getting thrown out the window. There are many rooms and halls and doorways, but my personal all-time favorite door in the house is the door to nothingness, which, yes, I have managed to activate to win a game. I've permitted myself some of the Duskmourn-themed enchantment helpers, such as Entity Tracker, the new Duskmourn art on Ethereal Armor, or the Mesa Enchantress that has new Duskmourn art, really stretching the definition of Mesa there, Duskmourn, and various creatures from that plane crawl throughout this blasphemous house too, of course, especially those that have eerie triggers or that help to unlock more rooms. Those eerie triggers are the real deal too. A Fear of Sleep Paralysis and Ghostly Dancers might be some of my favorite endgame cards in the whole deck. Some Pillow Fort stuff definitely remains, as Marina's story quite literally involves being stuck in a ghostly prison, a bubbled sphere of safety, leaving her ignorant to the arch-torture that surrounds her. Probably my favorite touch, though, is that I made sure this deck that cares about rooms has 4 walls. This is a dramatically worse version of the deck. The mana base is horrible. The enchantment count is way tuned down, which reduces how good a lot of the deck is, including Marina's own ETB ability. But I couldn't be happier with this version of the deck, because this way I'm not just focused on the semantic satiation of room cards, the abstraction of not really caring about rooms, but just caring that they are enchantments. And instead I get to actually focus on what the rooms do. I get to play the Charred Foyer and unlock the other half to set up a huge engine. I get to relock the Bottomless Pool with Marina's tap ability, so then I can manually pay to unlock it so that I can bounce additional creatures. I get to enjoy the tension of playing the Unholy Annex to draw extra cards, but not yet having unlocked the other half to get the demon token that will help me stave off the life loss. I care about the mana that the Smoky Lounge gives me to only spend on playing or unlocking more rooms, and then delight when I'm able to create a big spirit token off of the Misty Salon on the other side of that door. The rooms matter here. Unlocking them with Marina or other creatures in the deck is meaningful. It has an interesting impact on the battlefield. And that's the satisfaction I was hoping to get from this deck building experience. The deck's no longer just about the utility or the efficiency. For lack of a better term, I actually get to live in it now. I get to enjoy the space. This house is a total mess, and it's so much more fun to build. I've felt strongly disconnected from Magic storyline for a long time now, but the tale of Marina Vendrell has really stuck with me. A gal who many apparently believe could be the key to stopping the horrors that ravage the plane of Duskmourn is instead stuck in a world of total ignorance. For her, everything around her appears normal and serene, and she is detached from what's really going on around her. A defense mechanism where maintaining that ignorance and probing no further gives her the ease and comfort to not have to confront a much uglier and grimmer reality where everyone else is stuck in peril or suffering. That affected me big time. What a haunting warning of what ignorance is bliss really means. And that, in combination with Magali's ever fantastic artwork, meant that I was just drawn to that character immediately. And the fact that it also happens to work with a brand new mechanic that it turns out I enjoy very, very much was just this perfect storm for me to build my very first permanent 5-color deck, a color combination that I usually do not dabble in. So frankly, when I brewed my first version and started playtesting it a bit, I was bummed when it just kind of became paint by numbers, when the play patterns just turned out to feel like execute classic Enchantress game action number 9, or run program abuse commander ETB ability .exe and stuff like that. The archetype had abstracted itself. The semantic satiation had set in. We can resonate super strongly with a character or art or story or a specific mechanic, but on the gameplay and brewing side of things, sometimes some of our own instincts or deck building habits or heuristics run the risk of us making ourselves not able to access the version of gameplay that matches up with all those passions. It's the kind of thing that really gives me pause when it happens to me, that makes me feel like just caught in the lurch or something like that. Like I'm so passionate about it on one side, but then when I actually try to put it into practice, it feels so totally different and I'm not getting the joy that I thought it was. Like, what's happening? Am I just bad at this? Am I bad at deck building because I can't make these experiences line up the way I thought it was? And no, it's not that anyone's bad at deck building when they run into situations like this. It's just that it can be really hard to recognize what is the cause of that type of disconnect. It wasn't that I didn't care about those things after all, or even that I was doing a bad job. I simply couldn't access what I was really after. And when you get stuck in a mode like that, a pretty big reset can really help. Or in my case, a pretty big overhaul. Enforcing a strong theme and holding yourself to that restriction can be a real wrench and a half. I wanted to repeatedly untap Marina a bunch of times or animate a bunch of rooms with Zur, but heavily restricting myself to a theme was definitely the step that I needed to take to make sure that I could actually find what it is that I wanted from this deck. And I hope that's an experience that someone else out there finds useful too. So keep your eye out for that. If a deck starts to feel disconnected from you in that way, maybe you're just having that semantic satiation situation. And maybe you just need to try a new tactic to find your way back to giving that thing the meaning that it originally had for you. P.S. Would you do me a favor real quick? How would you feel if you were playing against this housey deck and then you discovered that there was a raccoon in the attic? I've gotten some strongly mixed reception to that one. I do need some win conditions for the deck, but I'm not sure if that one really fits the theme. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Feel free to weigh in on other cards that you think do or don't belong in the house. And of course, let me know if you've gone through any experiences like this too. Hit up those comments. Feel free to subscribe while you're at it. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.